Okay, we're back with the final part. I'm going to check out the rest of this discussion between Michael Huemer and Sapolsky. So far, I've been enjoying it. I don't know if they've really been addressing too many of each other's points, but it has been fun. So there's a link to the description to the other videos of this. Go check those out if you haven't already, if you're curious about this stuff. But I want to jump right into this. So let's go ahead and see where we're at.
Let me just flip that, because that's a little bit of lack of evidence isn't evidence of lacking sort of argument, which like sends you hurtling.
Wait, let's go back.
You can show that this has an influence. It doesn't mean that influences like that explain everything, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly.
Right, so that's the, there's an influence, and that doesn't mean that everything's determined.
Let me just flip that, because that's a little bit of lack of evidence isn't evidence of lacking sort of argument, which like sends you hurtling into a wall. Let me flip that over and do this in the most in-your-face possible way. Show me that somebody just did a behavior, and suppose that was due to this, the action of this one neuron, which really doesn't work that way, but show me that neuron did what it did, completely independent of hormone levels last morning, what the person ate today, what the genes are that make up that neuron, what developmental adversity was about, which neurons were caused by environment to connect up to this. Show me the neuron made that decision independent of any of those factors, and you've just proven free will. And currently, you can't do that. And thus we have exactly the issue you bring up. We can't prove that every single one of these things has enough influence so that there's nothing like free will anymore. Again, proof of absence isn't absence of proof, the two of those getting confused. But I think what we have to do is look at the arc of knowledge and look at the certainty with which we punish people now, and the certainty where within our own lifetimes there's been, oh, I had no idea biology had something to do with that. That completely changed the inhumane ways that we treated certain people. And you got to make this argument. Like when I went through all those factoids before, a study showing smells and a study showing fetal environment, all of that, 95% of those findings came in the last 50 years. 60% of those findings came in the last 25 years. Probably 40% of those findings came in the last 5 years. And you either have to make an argument that tonight at midnight, somehow we're done. There's going to be no more science. Like nobody's ever going to find out anything else. And you'll be right at that point if you say, nonetheless, we can't predict who's going to like chew loudly with their mouth open or who's going to be a mass murderer. We don't have perfect predictability. But you sit at this juncture and the show me a neuron that functioned independent of any of the influences that we know about now. And that can't be done. And you know that what making that mistake has often done is produced wildly inhumane practices of making people feel responsible for what they're not responsible for, or equally inhumane in terms of the damage caused, making people feel they're entitled to better treatment.
So what, is there some kind of precautionary principle? Like, we've seen all the damage that making this mistake has caused in the past, so we should got to be extra careful now to the point of erring on the side of this impossible standard, because obviously no one's going to be able to show that a neuron can do that. But why would doing that show that there's free will? Because then you show that it was acted in a way that's truly independent of its history, which according to Sapolsky is what would require, whether it be really what would require for free will. Now it's just an impossible standard. Alternatively, you can't ever show a case where any action of the neuron's completely determined by any of those things either. I guess that's kind of Kevin Mitchell point. I gotta pay more attention to Kevin. I see it down over here. It says there's a debate between Sapolsky and Mitchell. Might have to check that out.
Because of things they actually didn't have any control over.
Yeah, now, I'm tempted to say, you're trying to make us feel bad about things that we're not responsible for, right? Because all those inhumane things, nobody was responsible for those either. So, okay, but to your, I guess, larger point, like, can we scientifically prove the existence of free will or determinism? So, like, in principle, it could be proved, I guess, one way or the other. So, like, if we had a perfect model of the brain, and then, based upon whatever quantum mechanics, you solve the Schrodinger equation for an entire brain or something, and so that you could give predictions of what a person would do in any circumstance, and then we could just test whether it's 100% accurate in predicting. And if it was, then that would support determinism. And if it wasn't, that would support free will. I guess I wouldn't prove free will, but
Exactly.
Okay, but it'd still be pretty good. Okay, but then I think the question is, okay, so we haven't scientifically proven either, but what should be the default position? And my claim is, well, the default position should be that everything is the way it appears. Like I start by assuming things are the way they seem until proven otherwise. Right? So I start, and it just seems like I have free will, so I'm going to start with that. Unless I have compelling evidence against it. And so,
but again, that's led us in some really bad directions. It just seemed like some races are inferior to other races. It just seemed like it's okay for kids to be worked to death in factories with child labor. It's okay for people to be allowed to like beat their horses to death if the horse...
I guess what Huemer's going to be saying is that these are not kind of intuitions that he's interested in. Now he's clarified as this like intuitive automatic judgment, an appearance. Sorry, not a judgment, whatever. But so these are like processes of reasoning where you get to the conclusion that yes, okay, so it's okay for kids to work in this way. But ultimately, according to Huemer's own view, allergies are not kicking in suddenly. According to Huemer's own view, isn't this going to be... something's wafting around in here because I'm about to... something's making me sneezy. But Huemer's own view is that these arguments would ultimately be based on appearances, on seemings, on intuitions. So Sapolsky's right? That what seems intuitive changes over time, and so you can't just start that way. And isn't his whole case here that we have good reason to think that things aren't the way that they seem? I might just talk myself into being a hard
and pulling their like stock to the...
No, actually, I don't think that's possible. But, okay.
Market quickly enough in 1823 sort of thing. And then we completely changed our thinking about that. And every single one of those involved making the world like a more humane place. Now, in the face of, well, again, this intuitionism.
Like all of the moral progress that has occurred has been because of our moral intuitions, right? Like, how do we figure out that, you shouldn't oppress people? Like, well, that was all based upon, moral reasoning based on our intuition. So, like, all the good things and all the bad things, because all of our beliefs, all of our moral beliefs come from intuition. So the good ones as well as the bad.
This is true. But then you have ways of mechanistically showing what things are more than intuitions and which are solely that and incorrect intuitions. You throw a molecule into somebody's brain, and if it's the right molecule, that person will hear voices and believe they've just had, an ecstatic religious experience because it's a certain type of euphoria and hallucinogen or whatever. You intervene and you make a government more stable, and over the next 50 years, people have fewer kids and go to church less often because they're sources of science. You intervene and you can test and see which intuitions actually are accurate or not. And I think like a theme over and over is like intuitions can really, and over, have led you down a wrong path. I mean, my entire like world consists of like, you take a test tube and you take a pipette and you take up some fluid and you put it into another test tube and you do the most unintuitive thing on earth. You believe there's little tiny things in there that you can't see, and that by moving that could explain something about... That's ridiculous. That's the most counterintuitive things. Like continents move around? That's ridiculous. Or unintuitive things like we can say something about when our sun is going to die. And, at any given juncture, I think the challenge isn't to decide there's no free will whatsoever, because you're right, it can never be proven. There's no way to prove that there is no God kind of thing. But at any given juncture, to recognize that we have demonstrated already that there's so much less free will in domains that really, really matter, that's incumbent upon every one of us to reflect real hard at our current values and know that almost certainly they will be radically transformed by knowledge a century from now or a week from now, and question our views about responsibility and blame as a result.
Yeah, good. So, again, I think like you might be using intuitions differently from me because, when you describe how people could test their intuitions, I would say you could test empirical hypotheses, but like, there's no way of testing like moral statements in general, right? So
I told you we're using different vocabularies.
But anyway, and then like, some of these things...
You can find empirical results that change what intuitively appears to you. I think that's Sapolsky's point. And so whether this is, I do think he's going back and forth between two different senses of intuitive, but there is a sense in which addresses Huemer that Huemer could address back, but he's not.
Scientific theories that you said were counterintuitive, like I guess atomic theory and continental drift, counterintuitive. I guess I don't find them counterintuitive, but I guess, but what are they based upon? Well, so, okay, in some way, like they're all based on intuitions, right? And by that, I don't mean you just think about the theory and you just intuitively see that it's true. No, I mean somebody engaged in a process of reasoning by which they got to atomic theory. Okay, but that process of reasoning used their intuitions at various points, right? So, you have things like, well, I don't know, I have the intuition that the simplest explanation of something is most likely to be true, whatever, right? And it's not like we believe atomic theory because it's counterintuitive. It's like, no, we believed it because actually it was the most intuitive thing that actually explained the evidence, right? So, explains Brownian motion, okay? But, that's an observed phenomenon, but then also, you need mathematical premises, right? And then you need sort of like theory confirmation assumptions, like simplest theory is probably most likely to be true or something like that.
And parsimony, an awful lot of people have been like cut by Occam's razor of saying parsimony is the way to go because it's it's not the nature of nature to be simple and straightforward and natural. Roundabouts or whatever. And even in the realm that most challenges intuitionism, like quantum indeterminacy, you've pointed out what's exactly the case, which is the majority of physicists now believe in it, rather than there's multiple worlds or there's a missing variable or anything like that. But it's all summarized by Richard Feynman famously saying, if you think you understand quantum indeterminacy, you don't understand quantum indeterminacy. Nonetheless, that appears to be how
but Huemer's point was that the mathematics of it's based on the intuitions, like the intuitions and the direct appearances that it can't be otherwise than 1 + 1 being 2, those sorts of things. That's what he means by intuition. So in this sense, they are talking past each other.
Intuition, and clearly the imprecise way in which I'm using it, gets us into trouble over and over again. And in our place and time now, our belief systems lead us to perceive responsibility and causality in domains where our attributions are simply wrong, and it makes for a meaner world.
Okay. Are we supposed to be taking questions from the audience at this point?
Yes. So can we try to wrap up the...
Oh, so they're done. Okay, so in that point, I can be done as well. This is a very interesting exchange. I don't know if they were really engaging each other too much. I don't think that they really addressed each other's arguments, but there is a lot here to think and talk about. So that's cool. And we have been thinking and talking about it, which is even cooler, I guess. Cool.